fire here at the corner of Pine and what?
And Brother Paul Drive.
That was named after your dad?
Yeah, the city did that. Probably the year after he died.
Yeah. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So well, right here is the original church, Dennis. All of this was houses in behind us here. And it was the worst crime area in the city and the state, the police said, when we moved here 40 years ago. And now it's the Russ and Billy Matchett thrift shop, but it was the original church right here on the corner.
I asked you what you thought the most courageous thing your dad ever did in all of his life.
For my dad, I think it was definitely starting the church. He was not a preacher. He had friends come to him, you can't just start a church. And he said, well, we're gonna do it.
Let's go take a look at it.
Let's take a look at it.
This is where your dad first started, in this room then?
This little room here was.
How many would fit in here?
Oh, we might get 60 or 80 if we was packed in here like sardines. And
that'd be sardines, all right.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But now it's a thrift store.
Now it's a thrift store, and everything's $1 and under, unless you don't have $1, and then it's free. We've given about $150,000 in college and Christian school scholarships through this little thrift store. It's just been an amazing little ministry.
Let's go check out the soup kitchen.
Let's do it.
What's your record number of people you fed here in one day?
In one day, we fed over 600, a full Christmas dinner last Christmas.
And you're feeding families?
Right. Yeah. In the summertime, especially when school's out, we have a lot of kids and families. In fact, there's been a time or two where Daddy was telling somebody, he was telling the fella, said, the fella was telling Daddy, thank you for the meal. Thank you, Brother Paul. And Dad said, oh no, thank you. Well, I've read that Bible through and through. I can't find one place in that Bible where it commands you to come here and eat. I do find in that Bible where it commands me to feed, but I couldn't feed unless you come, so thank you. And that one fellow said, well, I ain't thought about it like that, Brother Paul. Okay, you're welcome.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow. And so anyways, you know.
So where are we going, Paul?
We're gonna go up where the shelter is, where we've had probably a couple hundred guys kind of get back on their feet, Dennis, and we've got 3 that stay with us right now, but they have private rooms. Let me just show you where Sean's place here.
What do you charge them a day?
No charge. They stay. We try to help them save money. No charge to stay here at all. Eat free, stay free. So they got a spiritual foundation. They also have little finances they've never maybe had before.
That's great.
All right. And Dennis, this is where my dad spent most of his time in office, right here. I still spend most of my time here. A lot of folks saved right here in these seats right here.
Boxing gloves in the Bible.
So I don't even know who did this. Someone brought this to me. They got my daddy's Bible, my daddy's fire helmet, and some old boxing gloves. Whoever did it wanted to give it to me and didn't want me to know who did it. So that's the last picture that we have of Dad. That was a month before he left us.
Tell me about your dad. Where was he born?
Scott, Arkansas, which is about 25 miles from North Little Rock.
What did your dad's dad do?
My dad's dad was a sharecropper. He picked cotton, but he would get drunk. As soon as he got any type of money on Friday, he would get drunk.
Did his dad beat him? Was he abusive?
No, he beat his wife. He beat his mother.
That's where he got his picture of what a family was like.
That was it. But you know, Daddy always said he wanted to be the daddy he never had, and he was.
What did he do upon graduation from high school?
I went to work for the fire department, I guess probably when he was 19, 20, and became a fireman for about 25 years.
Really?
Mm-hmm. You know, even before Dad was a Christian, he liked helping people.
So he was a good father.
He was a good father as far as a sinner could be. But he always said, you know, how good a father can you be when you're leading your kids to hell?
How did Christ change his life?
Radically. A case of beer a day, 3 packages of Tampa Nugget Sublimes. Back in those days, kids could go buy them, so I'll never forget what they were, Tampa Nugget Sublimes. And cursing, you know, his language was always very spicy. In fact, he said when he got saved, he lost half his vocabulary. But he changed radically. There never was another beer, there never was another cigar, I never heard another curse word come out of his mouth.
It was an overnight transformation?
Your dad's life changed like that?
It did, Dennis. You know, that we were at that little church, and he'd really already made the decision at the hospital. My grandmother was dying. She was a prayer warrior. And she was dying, and the doctors kept saying she won't live through the night. That went on for months. And Daddy would say, Mom, it's okay. Why don't you go on to heaven? And she'd say, Paul, who will pray for y'all? All my children are lost. And so that went on for months. And so he went down to the bathroom there in the Baptist hospital on a Saturday and said, God, if you'll let her live one more day, she'll know one of her kids is a Christian. He thought you had to go to a church and that you had to walk forward to become a Christian. So Sunday morning he got up and said, let's go to church. And we all was like, what do you mean? Because we didn't go to church. And he said, we're all going to church. Y'all get ready. So we go to church, and when they make an altar call at the end of the service, Daddy got up to go down.
What was the first thing you noticed that was different about your dad after that walk down the aisle and him yielding his life to Christ?
I thought it was funny that he told Mama on the way home that he was going to go home and pour all the beer out of the icebox. And I laughed, and I said, Daddy, how long do you think it's going to last? And I can see him right now. He looked back toward me, and he grinned. He said, well, Bub, I hope the rest of my life. And it did. And he went home and poured it out.
I've heard you talk about how his attitude toward other races was pretty spicy as well. Did he have a hatred, or was it just a disrespect?
I think disrespect would be a better word. And really, the flashpoint for the Friendly Chapel Church was because of the racial issue. And there had been a fellow sharecropper in Scott who would, Jimmy Lipkin, who would give my dad and my uncle Buddy, when they were kids, rides from Scott to North Little Rock to go to the Boys Club to box. And so in 1957, during the Central Integration Crisis, him and several of the other firemen are out in front of the fire station, and the troops are coming by, heading to Central, that Eisenhower had called out. And so Dad and these other firemen out there hollering, kill them, we'll get our guns, just doing what bigots do. And he looked down the street, and he saw Jimmy Lipkin, his black friend, who had given him rides when he was a kid, walking toward the fire station. He turned sideways, and Jimmy walked up to him, stuck his hand out and said, Mr. Paul. And Daddy saw the other fireman watching, and so he smiled and put his hands in his back pocket and just stood there and left Jimmy's hand hanging there. And he saw the look of hurt on Jimmy's face before he walked away. So the other fireman went to bed, and he cried. And he was so ashamed of what he did, he called my mama. And Daddy always called her Mama. But he called Mama, and he said, Mama, you'd really be proud of your husband today. And she said, I would. What'd you do, Paul? And he said, I did something I'll never do again. He said, I refused to shake a man's hand simply because of the color of his skin. But it was 12 years later in 1969 when he did meet Jesus that his heart was changed toward his brother. He was telling that story about Jimmy Lipkin at a church after he got saved, and he didn't give his name. And so after church, several of the ladies come up, and they said, who was the black man you wouldn't shake his hand? Daddy said, his name was Jimmy Lipkin. They said, he ain't dead, he lives out in Dixie. So Daddy went out there and knocked on the door, and Jimmy come to the door, and Daddy said, you know who I am, Jimmy? He goes, yeah. He said, Mr. Dunaway. He goes, no, Paul Holderfield. He said, Paul. He said, Jimmy, do you remember when? He said, as far as he got. Jimmy said, I remember, Paul. I'll always remember. The reason I didn't shake your hand that day, Jimmy, is I thought I was better than you. He said, Jimmy said, I just come to let you know you was better than me. You was a Christian, I wasn't.
So the reconciliation between your dad and Jimmy was a part of what God used to birth Friendly Chapel and the outreach of this
Well,
church?
I mean, yeah, the instance of not the reconciliation, but the handshake, the refusal to shake his hand is what was the flashpoint for Friendly Chapel, because when Daddy was saved at that little church there was a lot of prejudice in that church. And so after about a year, he come to Mom and said, you know, what do you think if he was feeding kids at the Boys Club? and he'd feed them 5 days a week. He'd cook the food, serve it. If he was working at the fire department, Mama would come pick the food up, carry it down and serve it at the boys club. He said, what do you think if we started our own church and we'll invite these kids that we're feeding? He said, I'll find somebody to come preach and we'll just have a service in the library there at the boys club on Sunday. The Nazarene church, what we call our district superintendent, took him out to eat one day and said, Paul, don't you think God's calling you to preach? And he started crying. He said, I do. He said, but I don't have any education. And he said, well, God's educating you. We can all see it. Dennis, you know, maybe he wasn't educated, but he had a wisdom that people would just be really blown away that, you know.
Tell me about how your dad's, you know, not only how he started, but how he began to reach out and feed homeless people here in this community.
When we moved here 41 years ago, this was the worst crime area in the state of Arkansas. So, you know, Daddy would see the winos and all that were down in this part of town, and he knew what it was to be hungry. And so he'd see these folks that were hungry, and he said, you know, I'm gonna feed them. And so, you know, a lot of times you just take things like for granted. You just don't realize what a blessing a little sack of cold cuts and some snacks can be to a kid that's hungry. But he impacted people from every walk of life. You know, Daddy always enjoyed saying years later that, you know, we came in down there when they didn't want us, but we stayed till they couldn't do without us. And we had an impact on this neighborhood, and still do.
What I hear you saying is, because of the way your dad lived and loved and led, you're still going to the bank on his legacy.
No question.
Take us to his last days. How did he die?
Daddy left us, he had done a funeral that morning for triplets. They had just started building a little house, and so he did the funeral and went by to get some lumber for that little house, and the fellow that was loading his little truck up said, Brother Paul said your tires are low. Why don't you go over and get you some air in your tires? And so he did, and Mama was following, and she went in a separate vehicle. She was standing outside of her car. He put a little air in the tires, and she said he stood up and he looked at the tire and said, Mama, it's still a little low. And put a little more in there. So she said he knelt down to put a little more air in the tires, and she said he stopped, he stood, and she said he locked eyes with her. And he said, oh. And she said he fell stiff as a board. Gone. And boy, I tell you, that was a rough day. But a good day for him. A good day for Daddy.
I've got one last thing for you to do. And this may be the most challenging thing to do, but if I could give you 3 minutes with your daddy right now.
I wish
you could, yeah, I understand. And you could, what would you say to him? How would you honor him if you were to give him a verbal tribute right now?
Daddy, sure have missed you. Sure have missed you. Thank you for everything. Daddy, thank you for everything. Thank you for the way you loved our mama. We all knew she wouldn't get nobody else, Daddy, if she hadn't. But she's okay. We're all there. I'm the only one that's not living out right next to her. They're all out there where you want them to be. She's enjoying the house just like you wanted her to. But she's lonely. But Daddy, thank you for loving us like you did. Thank you for setting an example for us. You always said you just want to be a sermon scene. You're the greatest sermon we ever saw lived, or ever will see lived. Everything's going good. Someone told me we couldn't fill your shoes, and we hadn't, but we're walking in your footsteps. I love you, Dad. I miss you. I'll see you soon.